Hello my creative friends, it's time to take another art break and we're going to continue on with our woodland series of animals who happen to be wearing red glasses. We first started with the character of Mr. Bramble Bristol. He's a rather curious guy. He's always looking for new adventures and finding the newest path through the woodland. And then we had Miss Ruby Redtail. She is a collector of all things cute and pretty. She loves big strawberries, tiny little acorns, and if she can find something sparkly, it's sure to come home to her nest. And today's new little character is Mr. Rufus Rumbleberry. Rumbleberry because his tummy is always rumbling. He loves anything that might be a snack and he's rather a hoarder when it comes to strawberries. Well, grab your things. I'm going to start the process with showing you how you can draw Mr. Rufus Rumbleberry. That's a mouthful, isn't it? I'm going to break down the shapes for you to show how you can draw him if you would like to. But if you'd like just a simple trace and paint option, I do have a sketchbook membership. You can go ahead and scan that QR code right there. It'll take you over to my Ko-fi shop, and that's where I have all of the line tracers for any of the paintings I do on my YouTube channel. It's very reasonably priced, and I so appreciate all those who contribute and support my channel that way. Thank you so much for doing so. Well, grab your art things and your materials and come and take an art break with me. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to tell you the story of why these little animals are wearing red glasses. The first simple shape we're going to start with is a dish bottle, kind of a soap bottle dish container shape. So it's a little narrower at the top. It's going to curve at the bottom. That's how we're going to build his little body. Once we have that done, then we're going to move up to the head. And this is kind of a large smile face shape that goes right at the bottom. You want to kind of go down just a little bit down in the body so it looks like his head is attached to his body. And off to the side, we're going to do those little furry bits. So it's got a little wide area. And then when we come up, we're going to do an uphill motion where it's going to come up the hill and then down the hill. And then we're going to have the ears off to the side, which are just two little simple triangle shapes off to each side. I'm going to put the nose in the center. That's an upside down triangle with an anchor shape that's off of each side of the nose. So swoop to the right and swoop to the left. And then I'm going to put a little muzzle area all the way around the nose because that's where I'm going to be building those patches around the eyes. For the eyes, I'm just showing you a simple one. It's a straight line with a round dot. And then those patches of the black patches that give it that raccoon feel is going to go around the eyes and then meet up with that muzzle area. There's going to be a little area of white there and then a little bit of some brown and some black in the center. Now let's work a little bit more on his arms. I'm going to start at the top. I kind of erase it just a little bit to bring it in, but that's just optional. If you feel like it's too wide, you can always make it a little narrower. I'm going to start with the arm on the right side. I'm going to come up by that cheek area, drop down a little ways, and then I'm going to curve my arm in, and then I just do wiggle back and forth for the hands. I don't put a lot of time into creating exact hands. These are whimsical little guys. And then for the other one, I'm going to come to the other shoulder, do that little curve around again, and then do those little wiggly fingers and bring my arm up. And that's how you're going to build his arms. Now we're going to drop down and work on that hip. So I'm going to come to the back here. I'm going to go upwards and create a little hip mark, so it's a little arch. Come down, I'm going to drop just a little bit lower for the top of his foot. Come out, and I'm going to make a little long toes for him, and then bring it back into that shape again where it comes back and then kind of comes up just a little bit. And then to create the other foot, you're only going to see part of it. You want it to be level with the other one you just created. It's going to make him look like he's sitting. So the hips need to be kind of level. And then you're going to come out again with those long toes and then bring it back even with that other foot, or as even as you can get. Now this is where it's going to start really looking like a raccoon. We're going to add that bushy tail in. Now you can bring it to a point. I make it a little narrower at one area, get a little wider, and then get a narrower again. And then you put the little ringtails on there. So between the black mask on his face and those little ringtails on his tail, it's going to make this character look like a raccoon. I put some whiskers in, and that's as cute as he can be. Again, you can always check into my sketchbook membership if you would like a simple trace and paint option. For this painting, I'm using Canson XL watercolor paper and 140 pounds. I'm using a couple different watercolor sets. I'm using the Paul Rubin, which is slightly more professional, and then I have this little specialty one called Decadent Pies. I'd always say just spend a little bit more on your watercolor paper and just use whatever watercolors you might have. I started out by spritzing my watercolors to get them nice and moist so they were ready to go, and I also created this color chart so I had an idea of the colors that I wanted to use. It's really hard to change watercolor once you decide you're going to put paint on the paper. It does stain your paper, the colors are harder to lift, and you really can't paint over them easily like acrylic paint. So it's a great idea if you can create a color chart first to get an idea of what colors you want to use. I'm going to be starting with the strawberries, and I'm layering on a cad red all over the strawberry areas. So while my paint is still wet, I'm going to pick up a slightly darker color. It's called apple, and I'm going to put that on one side of my strawberries. And on that one side, because the paint is already wet, it's going to just naturally float into the other color. It's called a blend on blend technique, where its paper is wet underneath with the first color, and then you're adding another wet color on top, so the colors should naturally blend. But if you need a little extra help blending your colors, my favorite way to do this is to rinse my brush out, give it a little bit of a squeeze, and then I can tickle those colors and slightly blend them together. Now this watercolor is going to dry a lot lighter. The watercolor always dries lighter than what it looks like when it's wet, and especially this red cad color, that cadmium color that I put on first, it's going to dry a lot lighter. So these strawberries take anywhere from 3 to maybe 4 layers of red before the color looks more saturated and looks very pretty, but you still keep your translucent layers by adding the colors gradually. The base color I'm starting for my mushrooms is the shadow color that I use for the strawberries. I paint that on all over my mushroom, but I try to leave those little white dots open if I can. If I lose them, I could always add them in with pen or even a little bit of white gouache in the end. And then the darker shadow color, I'm using a color called pecan, which is a darker, rustier color. I'm adding that to one side of the mushroom and then letting those colors blend naturally, using that little bit of a tickle technique to get my colors to blend. Now for this raccoon, for his fur colors, I'm using Van Dyke brown, a coal black, burnt sienna, and a little bit of burnt umber. I'm going to start with his forehead, and I'm going to be putting that black around his eyes, and in his muzzle I'm going to leave white. There's a little bit of a whitish area in between the black mask and this upper part of his forehead. Now these colors I'm doing basically the same. I've mixed them to tea consistency, which means there's more water than there is paint. I want a nice light look to this, and I'm going to be doing the same thing where I'm blending my colors. So I've added that Van Dyke brown everywhere, and now I'm tapping in a little bit of the black paint while it's still wet and allowing those colors to blend naturally. There's a little stripe area in between the forehead and the black mask, and that's going to be kind of an off-white color. So I'm going to go down and actually paint the black area of the mask area. I'm going to basically just kind of mostly go over my whole eye area. If I get some of that color in there, I'm going to be fine with that. Animal eyes are very colorful. There's not a lot of white, so I'm okay if I have that in there. Plus, I did scribble my eye in with pencil, so I could see it underneath. Even when that black dries, I'll still be able to see that eye shape underneath there. So I'm going to layer that in and let that dry a little bit. I'm going to softly put a little bit more of just that light color up into that fur, maybe even drag it down just a tiny bit into that white area. That's going to create that fuzzy look of not having a harsh dried line, of having exact of that there's a stripe here and a stripe here. So to give it more of that soft look, it's okay if the paper is a little wet in between your colors. If they blend just a little bit, that's fine. Again, these are just the first layers. I'm going to be adding several more as I go right along. So I'm just building it as I go. So for his body, I need to see a difference in between his face and his body. So I have to have a little bit of shadowing going on. I'm going to be leaving that muzzle around his nose and around the smile area. I'm only going to have just a tiny bit of color in there. That's a nice separation from his body to his face. But I'm going to need a shadow underneath his chin area. I'm going to need some shadows around his arms too. So when I lay those in, those are going to have shadows. His hands are going to be a little darker. So that's going to have more of that coal black feeling, like what's around his mask and on the inside of his ears. That's what the color of his little hands will be, and his feet. I'm going to build all of these colors slowly, again starting with a tea consistency and then perhaps moving more into a coffee, which means a little bit more tint. But even if you don't add more tint to your paint color, if you just add additional layers of the original colors you laid on after they're dry, they're going to make your painted area look a little darker. So again, take your time and build these areas slowly. At this stage, I'm going to give my raccoon a little bit more time to dry to see what my colors look like, and I'm going to work a little bit more on the background. I created and mixed up a blue. Since this is a set and all of these characters are going to look like a collection, I'm using very similar colors that I had used on my other paintings. I'm going to be adding a little bit more red to the strawberries as well, and then as this little raccoon dries, I can add more layers. Like the other paintings in this collection, it too has a foliage-filled background. I want to make sure I'm adding a variety of greens to those areas, and I'm going to be adding that little dash of blue, just like I had done with the other ones. So when you're mixing up your greens, just choose maybe 2-3 different colors and use those randomly on the leaves that are the closest to you in the foreground. And then as we move to that middle ground and the background, we're going to be using less paint, more water to create more of that washed glazed look. For the berries, I just chose a slight different shade of the blue, really close together though, and I'm just tapping on a lighter shade of the blue, turquoise color, and then tapping on one side. I chose the left side of my berries to add a little shadow, and because the colors are wet, they're going to naturally blend that way. I'm also using those same types of colors that I'm using on those blue leaves and my berries. That's what I'm going to be using on my butterfly as well. At this stage, I'm going to work a little bit more on his eyes. The black masks have completely dry, so I'm going to be mixing up some little brown, a rusty color called burnt umber, and I'm going to be putting that on the center of his eyes. Like I said, animals' eyes are very colorful, so I'm going to be adding this brown, and then I'll be adding some more details using some color pencils and my black micron pen at the end to add the detail to his eyes. At this stage, I'm just checking my greens again for my leaves to see if I need to add more layers. I want those leaves and the mushroom stems, those areas, to be more exact colors and more sharp lines. So I'm going to apply my colors, let them dry completely before I begin to work on that more watercolor glazed look in the background. So I'm adding these layers, I'm going to let them dry, and then I'll create that washy background look. And we mustn't forget that cute little snail right there in the foreground, where I'm just going to mix up a little bit of color and paint him in. I'm mixing up the color for the center of the flower. It's going to have a bright yellow first, and then just a little bit of tap of orange to one side. I'm still going to be building my colors, letting things dry in between, and then work my greens and my other colors that I want to stay exact and let them dry completely before I work on that background. The other area I'm going to work on now is those little pink blush cheeks. Because these are whimsical characters, I always like to add that little sense of blush. So I'm picking up just the slightest bit of color, adding that rosy color to the outside, then rinsing my brush off and then just slightly tickling that color again to make it go from a little bit darker to light into the center. It's the cutest look on these animals, and I like doing it on people as well. It's one of my favorite techniques. It's well worth practicing and getting to learn how to do it, because you're going to love it on your whimsical characters. I'm going to let everything dry again, and then up next is going to be adding a little bit more of that watercolor glaze look into my background. The colors I'm going to use on that glazed looking background are the same colors I used for the green leaves and for the blue leaves, as well as the berries. I've mixed it to really more like a tea consistency, and I'm mixing those colors randomly as they go. I'm going around and just brushing kind of quickly around my raccoon, around those berries. I don't want to reactivate those areas, so I'm adding some water, but not too much. I don't want to see a lot of shiny areas on my paper, so I'm being cautious with how much water I'm adding to that background so I don't reactivate any of those other areas. And then as I'm going, I'm brushing in some blue, brushing in some green, and then I'm going to let all that dry, and I'll be working on the middle ground next. This is the background. Now that everything in the background has dried, I'm going to be adding more of like that middle ground foliage. So I'm adding little taps of color. I'm not doing exact leaf shapes. I'm just basically kind of tapping my brush with a little different amount of color and pigment and water. I'm still not looking for real strong shapes of color. I'm looking for more like a middle shade of that color actually. Not too light that you won't notice it, but just enough darkness that you will. If you want to practice it off to the side, so you do just a little blend on a separate piece of paper, and then come back in and test it, you could always do that if you would like to try it. I always say less is more, so start with a few of these little plop marks on your paper instead of adding so many right away. At this stage, my raccoon has had plenty of time to dry, and you might notice how flat the colors look. There's not a lot of definition in between his arms or underneath that chin area anymore, or even between the hips. So I need to be adding additional colors. I'm going to use the same colors. Now you don't have to worry about them being mixed exactly the same that you had originally put on. The thing to keep in mind is keep them either tea or coffee and add another layer so you can bring in those shadow areas. Since I had given so much time to the drying process, my background is also dry, so I can come back in and add those next layer of colors that I need to add to any of the other areas I might need to add additional colors to. So I'm going to go ahead and strengthen the shape of that snail. I'm going to be adding just the subtle bits of color to the little raccoon on the white areas of his face. I'm adding just a little bit more blush to those areas as well to bring that color out just a little bit more. These are all just little subtle tweaks, but they'll really make a difference in the end if you take your time and add your extra layers. Once my watercolor steps were completely finished, I let my painting dry and I'm going to be starting the pen work using a micron pen in the nib size 01. I like using this tiny little nib size to create these little scribble bits for my painting. I'm going to be creating the dark areas of his eyes, the little pupils, using the micron pen and bringing him to life that way. I'm going to scribble those little colors and try to leave just a little catch light using the white. If you end up losing it all, you can always go back in with a little bit of gouache or perhaps a white ink pen and add those in. An added plus using the micron pen, it is a permanent ink once it's dry. So if you need to go back in and add a little bit more watercolor, you can, and you don't have to worry about that pen smearing everywhere. So it's a great tool to use to add this ink look to my paintings. Now that I have all the dark areas done, I'm going to switch and use the Jelly Roll size 08 and a white pen. I like using this pen. I love the little size of the nib. It's a nice sharper point, and the ink isn't quite as strong as a Uniball. It's a little bit softer, and I kind of like that look inside of the eyes and just a little bit here and there to scribble some white in. I always say white is almost like a little less is more, so you don't want to have white highlights everywhere, but some of it here and there really can add that extra pop to your painting, and it definitely brings those eyes to life. As promised, at the beginning of the video, I said I would share the tale of the red glasses. Long ago, or at least long enough ago that no one in the woods remembered exactly when, a little pair of red glasses appeared on a tree stump at the edge of the woodland. There was no note, there was no name, just a pair of bright red glasses waiting for someone curious enough to try them on. And that's when something rather wonderful was discovered. The red glasses didn't help you see farther, they helped you notice more. Tiny mushrooms tucked beneath leaves, the first strawberry turning red, a new path that wasn't there yesterday, and perhaps a friend who needed company. And ordinary things that somehow look much more interesting when you stop long enough to really see them. Before long, the word traveled through the woodland. Everybody wanted a pair. So now when you meet a woodland friend wearing red glasses, you know you found the curious ones, the ones who believe there's always something worth noticing. Because in these woods, the best things aren't always the biggest things. And sometimes you just need the right glasses to see them. And that, my creative friends, is the tale of the red glasses. Hopefully you enjoyed that little story break amongst your art time, and we can continue on now with using those colored pencils. This is one of my favorite steps, to add these little scribble bits using colored pencils. It's a fun way to add texture, add in just a few more colors that you didn't use with your watercolor. It's going to pop slightly different than what any pen would. The colored pencils are a super fun tool to use with watercolor. For the final steps of adding the glasses and the little green seeds on top of my strawberries, I'm going to be using the paint medium called gouache. It is an opaque medium. It dries very, very flat. It looks great over top of watercolor, and it's a great way to add these little final details. If I had put a masking fluid around the glasses area and in those little spots of the green berries, I could remove the masking fluid, and then there would be white paper underneath there, and then I could go ahead and easily paint in the red watercolor or the green of the strawberries. But I chose this way. It's just a lot simpler, a lot quicker, and a lot faster. And I kind of like this look of this more opaque medium on top of these elements. So then it just kind of pops a little bit more. The glasses stand forward more, and those little green berries or the little green seeds just add a tiny bit more detail to those strawberries. Well, this painting is just about done. I'm adding a little bit more watercolor. I'm going to take off the tape, and let's see what it looks like in the studio. These whimsical style storybook characters are one of my favorite to create. I love all the details, their whimsical nature. They just really do make me happy to create these. If you would like to have a digital copy of my artwork, I do have them listed inside of my Ko-fi shop for sale. And if you'd like to create with them and sell your items, there's also a small business use license attached to these images. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and consider doing it. I do new tutorials every week, and I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube push my videos out there. Well, thanks for joining me, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again. And perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.